Welcome to Security Sessions. I'm your host, Dan Tagney, and this is Season 2, Episode 3. So happy you're able to join us today. Today we go past protocols and passwords, and we get deep into the foundation of any robust security program. That's the organization's security culture. On our show today with me, I have George Finney, Information Security Officer, founder, and CEO of Well-Aware Security, and Stash Brazuca, CEO and founder of Compyl. Today we examine various factors that can impact the development both positively and negatively when it comes to security culture. Those things could be leadership's commitment to employees and the programs that they're going to offer, all the way through the advanced technologies they're using throughout their organization. This episode is jam-packed with great information that you're certainly not going to want to miss. Let's get into it.
I'm really excited for this episode, having both of you here today talking about a great topic. George, I wanted to start with you. A really theme that is often talked about that comes across on LinkedIn and blogs is this idea of increasing or creating cybersecurity culture in an organization. I think a piece of it is education, and a big piece of that is phishing and training. Curious from your standpoint, how do you think phishing and training fits into a positive cybersecurity culture in an organization?
Thank you for having me on the show, Daniel. I just an honor to be here. I know culture in cybersecurity is like one of the hottest topics right now. This week in the news, right, the new cyber NTSB, what the cyber board called out Microsoft on not having a security culture in their organization, which is a little shocking. I think there were some shock waves. I think it's hard to have a good security culture, right? There's a great leadership guru out there. His name is Peter Drucker. He coined the phrase "culture eats strategy for breakfast." Right? Really hard to get right. Executives come in, they have these massive, cool visions that they want to pull off, and often those visions or strategies fail because they failed to have empathy for their employees. They didn't take into account the culture of their organization and whether or not that culture would have supported whatever strategy it is. And I've written about this in my book, Aware, but culture eats cybersecurity for breakfast. And end of story. When you think about simulated phishing exercises or training, you're walking a really fine line on how you influence culture, right? Simulated phishing been proven. You can help reduce click-through rates. You can also have a really negative impact on your culture, right? If your security teams are victimizing your employees, if it really doesn't feel right to them, countless examples of folks that really treated employees the wrong way. And that was one of the biggest things when we started our program out. I think culture is so important. Security leaders, CISOs, we're not the chief culture officers of our organizations, but we have to work together with all of our leadership teams. I think, and again, it really comes back to empathy, right? Feeling how other people feel and thinking about how we're going to impact folks. I think building that relationship, building trust with our employees is incredibly important. And if we violate that trust with our security programs, if we beat people up, and I think that's going to damage the culture, right? You can improve it, but you can also have a negative impact as well. I think that's one of the things we've really got to think about to do.
Yeah, for sure. Stas, if you could take your CEO and founder hat off and maybe think back to the days when you were a CISO, you worked at some large organizations, enterprises. What was the cybersecurity culture at some of those organizations that you were a part of?
Yeah, I would agree with George entirely. I'd also be curious, George, to understand like how you figure out based on the culture of the organization, how you fit into that culture yourself, and then how you improve it. My experience has been generally going into an organization. If I was replacing somebody, generally that person being replaced was like the office of no, or if it was a new role, it would be building something up from scratch. But the overall perception of security in general, no matter any organization I've been in, is it's necessary, but nobody actually wants that person there or doing their job, or it's just a nuisance and it adds no value. So my approach has always been like a reasonable level of security based on the organization that I'm working for and understanding what's important to that organization. Often they don't know what's important to the organization. But being able to put in like, sensible controls and working with the business to make sure that they can still reach their goals and hit their revenue targets and things like that, but just do it in a reasonably safe manner, and being able to articulate clearly to the business where they are from a risk perspective, where we're trying to get to from a maturity perspective, and what it's going to cost and what we need to do to get there. But I mean I think that the major issue that most security professionals have is not understanding the culture of that organization and the requirements and like what that business is trying to do. I see that all the time.
Yeah, for sure. George, there's this theory that exists, and the theory is that employees are the riskiest parts of an organization. I'm curious how you think about that.
You're saying it nicely. I think the unofficial motto of our entire cybersecurity industry is that people are the weakest link.
Yeah.
Right. So think about that for a second. If we believe as an industry that people are the weakest link, what impact are we having on the culture of our organizations if we feel like people are like you said, the riskiest part of our organization, right? When you talk to CEOs, what's the most important part of their organization? They're going to say the people every single time. What's the most important part of our? I like to say people are the only league when it comes to security. When you think about using fear in our security training, which is something we've done for years. Fear is a great tool if what you want to do is to keep people from touching a hot stove. So they don't do that. But from a neurological perspective, fear shuts people's brains down, right? They can't do new things. They go into protective mode. If instead what we need people to do, and I think this is what we do need people to do, is to be proactive, right? To do new things, to change the behaviors. What the neuroscience suggests is we have to use different tools, right? We have to use optimism. We have to use inspiration. We have to engender curiosity in our team members. That takes coming from a very different perspective as a security leader. We can't just not be the office of no. I think we've got to help connect with people. We've got to use a different message to really bring that out of people. I think culture is one of the most important parts of this. I think the research is wrong, right? I think the myth of people being the weakest link is wrong. I think people can get it right. I look back and the relationships that I've built with different people in my organization, I think that's helped them feel like they can play a better role in our organizations. In security, we like to say that when you read your CISSP or whatever, security is made of people, processes, and technology as though they're equal slices of a pie, right?
And the number one thing for the CISSP is like if a human life is in jeopardy, then it trumps everything else, and that's
exactly. People are the ones that build the technology, that configure the technology, that use the technology. People are the ones that create the processes and follow the processes or not. It's 100% people. I think when we're trying to put technology in place, we're trying to make it foolproof. And every time you try and make something foolproof, you're trying to work around the people instead of working with them.
Yeah, I would agree with that. George, I don't know if you have any specific examples where you have made that culture shift, and then how long it's taken to do that culture shift, and the size of the organization, or even the vertical, or what type of company it was. Because like, I mean, I have personal stories as well. Most of them are in financial services, and like, I'm happy to speak to that, but I think you're probably a little bit better suited than I am on that.
Yeah, I've been in higher education for a long time. Most of my messaging comes from higher ed. And I try and align with the existing culture in higher ed. This is a great example, but we have a mascot here at SMU. We're the Mustangs. Gosh, one of the things that I did that was really impactful was I made a calendar. I did it for a couple years in a row. And for the first year, you those despair posters that would go up on the walls. They're making fun of the inspirational posters. I tried to do that with our security calendar. So I had pictures of horses. People loved that we gave them calendars with pictures of horses, right? First of all, and then we had funny, quirky little explanations of different elements of a successful security program, right? So we're connecting with them at an individual level. And they wanted it, right? I got so much feedback, like, when's the next calendar? And so again, as a university, we have this motto, future leaders shaped here. That's our university motto. I wanted to connect back to that. So in our next year, again, we did horses again, but we picked like the Mustangs that changed the world, right? To align with that messaging. And we had things like Gandalf's horse or George Washington's horse. Again, it's a quick like history lesson for connecting with the person as a human, what their interests are. And then we're sneaking in some security lessons there along the way. And being able to relate to someone, again, we're getting out of the normal employer-employee relationship and we're connecting with them as a human. That's how you shift culture.
Yeah, that for sure. You just actually you reminded me of a couple things that I did in my last role. My last role as a CISO, like I don't know a lot of organizations that have this role, but we had a business change manager when they had a whole department, and we ended up taking one of the one of the ladies from that role, and she ended up being like just amazing to our team. But we did the same thing that you're talking about. Like we tried to connect with the company. So like we didn't go down the super staunch, like here's a security awareness training that no one's going to watch and no one's going to pay attention to, and you'll have a quiz. But we really focused on explaining to the end user, like with like posters and just events, like lunch and learn thing about why this is not just important to you, but also important to it's important to the business, but also important to you. But like explaining what business email compromise is and like how it works and showing them like simple things like, have I been pwned? And you can check your accounts and like just trying to make it more tangible and like more interactive and fun. But that really went a long way but it does take so much effort to plan all that out. And it was pretty much a full-time resource for a 600-person company. So like it's a costly exercise, but yeah, it's definitely worth it.
I'm curious, George, I'm going to keep you on the hot seat. I was looking at some data, and according to the FBI in 2022 Internet Crime Report, business email compromise resulted in 2.4 billion in losses in the US alone. So with that in mind, where business email compromise has been going on for quite a long time, still continues to be an avenue.
We didn't plan that, by the way. That just is a really interesting segue that went that way.
My question is that there's a lot of new and emerging technologies. So how do you balance the two? How do you balance the tried and true business email compromise that is still very disruptive to organizations? But then we also have new technologies with AI and machine learning that there's different kinds of threats that are going to be thrown towards organizations. How do you balance all of it? It seems like a daunting task.
I love that question, Daniel. I think there are a lot of folks out there that take the position, look, we've got to train everybody on the new habit or the new scam of the week, right? That is a lot to keep up with. And I worry that approach focuses too much on the fear elements, right? We've got to be constantly scared and not do a lot of different things. And frankly, it is a lot to keep up with. In my book, Aware, it's like Stephen Covey's 7 habits for cybersecurity. I think there are 9 cybersecurity habits. But that's my take on it, is that rather than focus on all of the universe of potential threats that you can have, instead, I want people to develop healthy cybersecurity habits. I've come to think of my role more as a cybersecurity coach. You're not just an individual that I'm coaching you on, you're a part of a team. And I want to help bring out your natural strengths, as well as the strengths of the people around you, to be able to form a really good defense that doesn't rely on having to keep up with the threat of the week or the threat of the hour, really. And I think instead we've distilled down the security advice that we're putting out there, and we put it into 9 categories, right? These are the 9 cybersecurity habits. And then we went a little further. We built a cybersecurity personality test to help you identify your biggest cybersecurity strengths, right? This is what a coach does when you have somebody try out for your football team. I work at a university, so I think a lot about football. If you've got a sprinter who comes onto the team, that's their natural strength. Where do you put them on the team? You don't expect them to play every position. You don't expect them to be on the offensive line. you put them in a wide receiver or maybe cornerback, and you play to their natural strengths. You train them, you drill them, you practice on those areas where they're already good at. You don't try and fix all their weaknesses. You put a team around them that complements them, and you organize your team based on your unique goals, whatever that is for your business or your industry. And that's how a great coach plans for the unexpected. They work together to build a team that has complementary strengths.
Stas, just piggybacking off of
Yeah.
of this business email compromise. I know you're talking to prospects and leads and customers day in and day out. Does anything come to mind for you of a main point of struggle or concern today that organizations are having when it's coming to phishing and training, or just concerns they have across their organization when it comes to cybersecurity culture? Anything front of mind for you?
You have a lot of companies that are still just really pushing out the traditional security awareness training, and it's the same one every year. And if they're doing phishing training, it's pretty basic. But it all comes down to fundamentals. Like, it's always, and I'm sure George's book is probably going to touch on that as well. But it's really just educating the end user, having them be able to identify a phishing email, and although they're getting better, but also technology has gotten better as well. Like with Office 365 and Google Workspace being adopted as readily as it is, catching a lot of the links before they even hit the accounts. And also, we're seeing a drop in ransomware because there is some new technology which is locking down devices. I'm usually not for pushing technology first. I'm usually more for educating the user and putting in a policy in place. But there are, like, I think in the past 2 years, there's been a pretty significant increase in terms of technology being used for protecting end users. But it always comes down to educating them. The problem that I have with them, and I can clock this from a mile away now, every time I get onto a call with a new prospect, once you get to meet the leadership team, it's pretty easy to identify like how far this organization wants to go in terms of their security posture as an organization, but also like how much they value their employees being trained. Because a lot of people are afraid of change, obviously afraid of costs, but also that it's pretty easy to see like when people are stuck in their ways and they're just looking for a checkbox.
Yeah, for sure. George, some organizations actually that we've spoken to have created reward programs. So when employees have successfully or made some improvement year over year, or have actually called out and brought to the attention a real phishing email that has popped up, and it's allowed an organization to maybe highlight that, and raise concern that, hey, we should watch out from this. Susie or John from HR brought this to our attention. And even gift cards or little gadgets. Do you think that's good practice? Are there bad things that could backfire if you're doing something like that? How do you think about that?
I think incentives are one of the most effective ways of helping influence human behavior, right? So there have been some companies over the last year that were breached, and they looked at their incentives, right? They thought about, hey, you know what? I think financially we want to include cybersecurity in our bonus program, right? We've got to take this into account to make sure, right? Just like with any other incentives, right? If what you incentivize for your teams is going to influence your behavior, and if you've got a disincentive to report messages, that's going to come through as well. For me, we made cyber challenge points. I don't know if you can see that, but anytime someone makes a difference in security, we want to be able to give our challenge point to that person to recognize that connection to our security team, right? We want to build that relationship. We want to help them feel like, hey, you know what? You did something great for our security program. You're now a part of the team. We've also, for different events, we work with HR to give away free vacation days, right? That's what we do for our corporate wellness programs, right? That's a great way of influencing people's behavior. Somehow, like, we trick people into eating healthy or quitting smoking or starting to exercise, right? That's a great way of incentivizing folks. That's actually why I called the book Well Aware. I wanted to bring this thing that we already knew worked in terms of changing behaviors, wellness programs, and marry that to our awareness programs, right? And make them more effective.
I'd be curious to hear like what your personality test or compatibility test with security. I'm assuming it's in the book. Is is and what type of questions you ask. I'd be curious to see that. So.
Yeah, so it's free. Anybody can take it. It's on our website, wellawaresecurity.com. And it's 22 questions. Takes about 5 minutes to go through.
Yeah.
But it's engineered to be a lot like the Clifton StrengthsFinder program.
That's great.
And so there's some hard questions, right? It's not about technology. It's really about what your values are as a human. So every one of us comes to security in our workplace with a lifetime of experiences around security. Like my bike was stolen as a kid. That really impacted me, and that shaped the way I think about security, and that changes the way that I make decisions differently from other people. And I think knowing that there are these different personality types when it comes to security actually helps me collaborate with other folks, right? Whereas if I have a different personality, sometimes I can come into conflict with other people. Why don't you have the same values that I do? And instead, we can think of different personalities from a diversity perspective, and that diversity of perspectives can help increase your security on your team if you're able to embrace it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so
I'm curious for both of you. So I'm gonna tell you what I find to be a entertaining, I guess, security story. And I'm wondering if it will jog a memory for either one of you of a personal experience you have. So there is one of the professional sports franchises here in New York. The owner of the team was very frustrated because he kept forgetting his passwords. So he, and this is a big company, he removed passwords. This is in the 90s.
No.
This is a story you can look up. He removed passwords from the entire organization because he kept forgetting them and getting very frustrated. It led to a significant breach, and it was a big problem when I guess consultants came in and they found out what policy he put into place across the entire organization. It became, again, a well-known story. Let's just say, as far as I know today, they use passwords and he's forced to use them. Any stories, kind of war stories that either one of you that come to mind as far as bad practice that you've seen across an organization? Stas, I'll start with you if anything comes to mind.
Yeah, this still happens all the time. We run audits on like companies all the time, and then we look at like their password policies, and like the amount of times that you find like a total carve out for an entire group of people or shared devices. This happens all the time. Yeah, the war stories would be just people when. Yeah, I could tell one story. I was working for a company, I'm not going to obviously mention it, but they were getting breached on like a daily basis, and it's because they had passwords. And so it's like an Office 365 environment, and they were seeing like suspicious activities and everything and login. This is like when it was first released. Password policy enforcement was really weak, and this was all happening because they were too afraid of the backlash of the users to implement MFA. So they literally thought it would be better just to keep those users happy and just deal with the breaches as they happen. And they were all coming from one part of the world, and they were just too deadly afraid of the users to actually make the changes, even though they were being readily exploited. That was a fun place to be in.
Georgia, any war stories come to mind?
Yeah, I would say, obviously, I can't give any operational details of my current role, but this comes back to culture, right? Particularly in cases where you grant exceptions to certain groups of people, right? If the same rules don't apply to everyone, right? So if an executive or group of executives say, "Hey, you know what? We're tired of changing our passwords, right? Let's make our passwords never expire." Okay, that doesn't feel right to people. So that's an organization I consulted with. Yeah, we're going to embrace never changing our passwords. Again, I think when I hear stories like, okay, we're going to fire people for clicking on a phishing message.
Yeah.
Cool. And I understand, particularly for repeat offenders, there's a lot of frustration. I've chatted with a company that implemented this. Right. What do you do if your CEO clicks on that phishing message? Are you going to fire your CEO? Are you going to embrace the cost of a recruiting firm coming in that you're going to spend $250,000 on to find the next CEO? No, of course you're not going to do that. And your line employees also know Yeah, they might get fired, but the executive team isn't going to. And that impacts culture. That impacts the way people think about security. Again, this is not my current day job, but definitely I've seen people struggle with that, and it's a really hard thing to do, and you've got to be able to navigate that and have an open conversation about it in your organization to make that a priority.
That's for sure.
For sure.
I appreciate both of you and thank you so much for making time for this today. We've had a lot of fun, and I think just again being a resource and being able to have access to information is important, especially as people are trying to learn and see what best practices exist. George, your book, where can that be found?
Everywhere good books are sold. So it's on Amazon. There's an audiobook on Audible, but you can get it at Barnes & Noble or Target. It's in bookstores in person as well as online.
Great. Yeah, excellent. Thank you both again for being here. This was fun and exciting, and I will have to do it again soon.
Sounds good. Thanks very much.
Thanks, y'all.